Okay, everyone, welcome to our 5th day of the Summer Institute in Computational Social Science. Today we have the great privilege of having Professor Selim Balcısoy with us, who has been with Sabancı University for nearly 20 years. He is a professor of computer science. Previously, he was the graduate school director and associate dean for research. He's the director of the Behavioral Analytics and Visualization Lab here. Prior, he was a board member and general manager of PhysioThink Information Technologies and a researcher at the Nokia Research Center in Dallas. He has a PhD in computer science and computer graphics from Lausanne Federal University. And today's lecture for Professor Balcısoy will be on what is a computer scientist doing in the Ottoman Bank archives. So, Hocam, thank you so much for being with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you for the kind introduction, and I'm really sorry that I cannot be there physically because this is in parallel with my annual vacation. But let me start with my slides. I hope you can see the slides well on your side.
Yes, Hocam, we can see the slides.
Okay, thank you. So actually my lab is doing lots of projects, has been doing lots of projects before the COVID on with companies, financial services, insurance, retail, and so on, as you can see from the slide. And we are also affiliated with MIT Media Lab, and we have been conducted many projects with them and also exchanging students, and still part of it still going on. But recently there has been two changes, two different changes in data science. Actually three. One is AI, but this talk is not on AI. Two of them, one is GDPR, so privacy, and companies are becoming quite reluctant to share their information, especially customer information, due to privacy regulations in Europe, of course, in Turkey, and also globally. This is a new phenomenon since 2017-18. And also another issue is that most of the research we have been doing early 2015 to 2020 is now part of regular workflows or analytical workflows. So in one sense, the academia served quite well and achieved the goal that masses are adopting what we were doing as research. But on the other hand, of course, we have to change our focus. So in my lab, we have been thinking about what to do and how to get access into behavioral data and how to make some cutting-edge results. We looked into archives, and first we looked into archives of Crete, the Turkish foundations, vakıfs in Crete, through an organization called SALT. SALT is a Turkish archival research institution. It's a private body. And then later on, they also have access to the Imperial Ottoman Bank archives. And then, of course, we looked into that, and it's a difficult process because some of them are digitized completely, some of the data is not digitized, etc. But we started with the personal files. So we have access to the complete HR data of the Imperial Ottoman Bank, approximately around 5,500 people between 1850 until 1930. So one advantage of this data is that you don't have GDPR problems because this company doesn't exist anymore, and even the grandchildren of those people are not around. So if, on the other hand, there are other problems which I will present right now, and I will also try to look from this data from a contemporary business perspective, so how we can learn from these archives. For historians and for other social scientists, I do understand that this data or this type of data has other meaning, but we are looking from a more utilitarian point of view. So our focus is on resilience and diversity. So because these are contemporary social challenges, we are still trying to figure out what is happening now in Europe or what has happened in US last year about diversity, migration, and integration is a big issue. So how to manage diverse workflow is still a big problem. And another problem is resilience. Since the pandemic, we have also witnessed a large and impactful regional war in north of Turkey, and resilience became a top issue. There is another issue which I'm not going to talk, but this data may shed light on, is inflation. So this is a very recent topic we are trying to think about how to cope with, because not only in Turkey, globally, inflation is a big problem, and it's a big problem for large organizations. So, but today I will talk mostly about resilience and diversity. So resilience is an important topic in business management. So I have looked into business management literature, and we're not at McKinsey, strategic consulting company is a good place to look at. They have open reports and so on. And they summarize its 4 traits of resilient organization. Agility comes on top, of course, because this you have to be agile and self-sufficient teams. So team building, how to manage teams and how to build good teams. So this is a big problem, actually. If you are running an engineering company, or if you are NASA sending people to Mars, or in the military, everywhere you have to build up successful teams. And this is still an open question. So it's also good to look into archives, how people succeeded or failed in building teams. And then leadership, how to select and foster leaders, and how to build up a culture is very important. I know this doesn't resonate well with computer science, but I mean, we have to find some hints from the data to support all these claims, all these claims from management science or management consultancy business with data. So this is our main idea. If can we find something from large data sets, large historical data sets, to support these claims? Because some organizations are better than the other ones, of course, and they maintain function and structure, whatever it takes. So we can look into US organizations like Coca-Cola and McDonald's, and they're very big and successful organizations, or European ones, European banks, for example, they are operating for hundreds of years. So what makes a company successful in terms of resilience? This is one of the questions. So how to identify this from data? Because there are many different ways. If you look into management literature there, and also sociology and so on, there are many different ways to look into that problem. But we are trying to solve this problem from data point of view. The second item is diversity. So diversity is a contemporary HR problem in US and in Europe, and because it has something to do with the compensation structure, it has something to do with the loyalty. What happens if you transfer one employee from one city to another city, or who climbs the social ladder? So is there a boys network which happens, which is there all the time, but nobody is talking about it? If you go to a company, large company, Turkish one or international one, and ask for their HR data, this is impossible to get, not only for an external researcher like us, but also for internal researchers or internal HR structure, because it reveals many details which people don't want to talk about. But this is perfectly normal, because we are humans and we never act on rational decisions. There are also some other factors which we know very well everywhere. So this is not only isolated to some type of companies or some type of countries, it is everywhere. Only the degree is different. If you look into US diversity workplace statistics, the future will be much more diverse. But in another sense, the future will be diverse, but we also can think about 19th century, 18th century empire. They were also diverse, like the British Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the French Empire. So there were many different minorities, and the companies somehow in those empires succeeded in managing different racial and ethnic minorities. So it was not always the same ethnic group ruling the banks and the companies and the organizations. It had to be diverse. And diverse management also increased revenues, and is kind of a template for a better performing companies. So let's keep this diversity as a positive thing in mind, and not only because of political issues, but also because it makes sense to be diverse. So it makes a company more attractive for better performing employees. So the motivation is so it leads to this computational prosopography. Prosopography is it's new to me as well. So I learned it when I was looking for this presentation some time ago. It's a sociological and culture heritage term. You look into different, almost all aspects of the same group of people. So in one way, if you look into all the employees of a company using computational tools, it can be called computational prosopography. There are examples in the literature on that, recent ones for different workforces, but I haven't seen any example of a single company with all the employees. So we have access to HR data, legal, and we also have access to some reports about legal, ethical, and business issues. So meeting minutes, we also have access to that from the HR perspective. So in the literature, longitudinal surveys are coarse and missing, and they miss critical business and diversity aspects. So longitudinal surveys, which means like 5 to 10 years, have expensive and difficult to perform. And we have this term, living lab, coined by MIT Media Lab some time ago. So you look into a country or into a city or some parts of the city and analyze it as a lab, but it's a living lab because whatever you do, when you change policies and so on, you can see the impact immediately. I just want to ask a question to the audience now. Is everybody clear with the sound and video? Is it okay?
John, yes, so the camera here doesn't really show it, but the audience is about 30 people. There are participants who come from computer science, computer engineering, civil engineering, sociology, political science, psychology. So it's basically all disciplines are being represented.
Okay.
The voice is very well. The audio and video are also very well. No,
okay.
With internet connection, everything is perfect. So
okay, good to hear that. So whenever there are questions, can you please help me to get the questions?
Of course,
I don't know if I'm going too fast or too slow. I know
we have plenty of time, so everything is up to you.
Okay, good. So the main motivation is to make an analogy of a living lab using historical data. So we selected this bank because we had somehow access to this longitudinal data. And this bank Imperial Ottoman, or in Turkish, Osmanlı Bankası, the modern name, actually is not an Ottoman bank. So when you look at the owners of the bank, you see British and French people. So they run the bank, and they run the bank most of the time through letters, which is good because we have access to those letters as well. So, and this bank was one of the few banks who get the banking license in the Ottoman Empire. And it had, let me repeat, it had nothing to do with the Ottoman Empire or the ruling family at all. It's just a name. But it was famous at the time. So even Jules Verne, so the trip to Moon, one of the creditors for that trip was the Ottoman Bank. More interestingly, if you look at this list of banks, you see, for example, in Geneva, Lombard Odier, or in Vienna, Rothschild Bank. Some of those banks, they are still around. So banks are quite resilient organizations. And Ottoman Bank was also still alive and around until 1990s, so more than 100 years. But it went through different transformations, of course. So what do we have as data? So we have the personal dossiers of employees. First of all, we have pictures of them. which is totally useless from a behavioral data point of view, because we cannot start anything with the picture. But still, we do have, so it's nice and fun to have. And then we have handwritten information about the employees, so name, father's name, and education, marital status, and so on, and also salary, and also the school, and so on, and starting position. So, and this is all handwritten, unfortunately. So the one side of the page is printed. It's like a form, like maybe you remember from old times in Turkey, we had all these forms. Now it's all electronic, but one side is handwritten. And of course, you might think this is piece of cake, as we thought also, because my expertise is not in computer vision or handwriting recognition. We thought that we just train it, and as handwriting recognition is one of those well-studied topics in computer vision, we will get the results in few minutes or hours. But as we will see this is not the case. So this is another example of the dossier. So we also have the locations, the functions, the salaries, and also bonuses if they get some bonuses. So leave of absence, one interesting quote is, at those times, they were quite generous about leave of absence. So today we have a couple of weeks maximum, and then at those times, a couple of months, people were on vacation, or most of the time they were sick. So probably the health condition was not so well, and people were sick, and then for a couple of months, and then return to work. So what we did was we took that raw data. That raw data was actually pictures, PNG file, and then try to transcribe it, load it to the database, and run some analytics. So at the end of the day, we did that because we want to do some hypothesis testing. So we had approximately 6,000 or 5,500, depending on how to count from the dates, bank employees, handwritten in French. And when we first look into those files, we got motivated observing the change of social fabric from the empire to different nation states. And can we test some hypotheses of historians working on this data? Because one important Turkish historian wrote a book about that archive, and in some part of that book, he was asking for computational help. Actually, he was mentioning that, okay, if one day some people can digitize and analyze this data using computers, they should look into those problems. Actually, we are still working on those hypotheses, because as you can think about that, getting detailed and correct information out of such an archive is a tedious task. So it took us 2 years to reach a successful transcription of this archive, because we had two fails. So let me talk about fails, because people always talk about their successes, but fails are also, mistakes are also very, very important. It saves time. So first, we looked into the typical magical machine learning solution. So we load the images, and Amazon and Google and an EU project called Transcribus, they claim that they can read such data without a problem. And of course, when you load such data, there are different configurations to look into and so on. We spent some time with that. It failed. So we said, okay, it failed. No big deal. That can happen. The second attempt was much more costly because we built a tool for people, so for humans to read and transcribe those documents, similar to Amazon's Mechanical Turk, but much more capable. It took us a couple of months to build that tool, and also much more effort to recruit people who can read French and transcribe. It failed in a big scale because even some basic words like Baghdad or Damascus, it has so many different writing styles, and people get confused, and they started to improvise and so on. So the data, the output was not satisfactory at all. So then we started to think one more time. So try to understand why the machine learning, so the machine reading is not successful. One of the problems was that, so we have approximately, let's say, 6,000 dossiers, and the bank has more than 80 branches. So, and over that timeline, they have different people filling those forms, and everybody has a different writing style and different handwriting. So whenever you teach the AI as a handwriting, it will not read another person's handwriting so successfully. So most of the academic papers on handwriting recognition, they look into one person's or few persons' writing, and they don't look into also into forms. They usually look into pages, a single page. But here we have forms, and forms are different structure. So we build a third workflow. It's about machine assisting human, or human assisting machine in other ways. So there is a EU project called eScriptorium. They can successfully handle French language, French handwriting language. They have a model for it. And then the output of that model, we fed into something called a validation engine, but the human is going to validate and also correct if there are some mistakes. And that was a quite successful. Still, you have to employ a human, but human assistant machine learning is quite successful. And now a master's student is working on that to incorporate into eScriptorium project. So, but remember, so machine learning or AI is not a magical tool which can help you immediately. So that you have to get problems. On the other hand, for example, we also had some files for meeting minutes. And let me show an example. Like that. The person, these are the meeting minutes of the management, weekly meeting minutes on HR. And it was all typewritten. No problem at all. The computer can read them without a major mistake. And you just have to pay Amazon. But if you have such document, then you have a big problem because there are many, many different details. Even humans have problems to read. Not only computers. It's also we also work with historians and archive professionals to read those documents. It's not easy. Okay, let me go back to how not to or how to handle that data. I hope I didn't scare you, but it's difficult. So we finished reading and verifying of some basic set of data. So where the person started to work, nationality, religion, name, start and end of employment. We also finished, this is a little bit old slide, we finished reading of the board of directors meetings for only the HR part, not the business part, because we are only focusing on HR. And then we started to process the data. So we said, stop, we don't want to read everything. This is not a project on reading everything. This is a project on understanding the diversity issues, resilience issues. Now, let me give some perspective about that company, the bank. So, actually, Ottoman Bank is one of the first multinational and supranational organizations. So, it survived different transformations. It started as a bank for an empire, but at the end, it was a bank for a republic. And it started with different owners from British and French capitalists. But then at one point during the First World War, those owners were enemies, actually. So it went through different transformations. Also, it went through different geographical transformations because empires went away, and then we had nation states. So we looked into 1890 and 1925, where the Ottoman Empire transformed into tens of nation states, not only one, Turkey, but also different, and also went through different wars. There are few papers on economical activities during the Ottoman time. So, and for example, we know the population of the empire. There were some census. So the population declined because the empire lost land significantly, millions of square kilometers. But still a very sparsely populated empire. So 22 million. So it's nothing, almost a little bit larger than Istanbul today. Then but tax revenues increased. The population decreased. The tax revenues increased. There were no big inflation at that time, so it was an increase of and GDP also increased. So the people got rich in two different. So between 1880 and 1913, the population got rich. The GDP, the tax revenue increased, and the population remained almost stable or decreased a little bit if we don't consider the fact that they lost land. So this is the economical picture, and this is the geographical spread of the important branches of the empire, of the bank. So of course the main branch is Istanbul, but then Izmir, Thessaloniki, Selanik, and then Beirut, Cairo, Alexandria, Baghdad. They were important, very important branches. After the Republic, Ankara became also a very important branch. Another historical perspective is crisis. So there were many different economic crises and two pandemics, cholera pandemic, which we don't talk a lot right now, but it was very important, and you can see it in the data of Izmir, because the trade almost stopped in Izmir because of the cholera pandemic. They were selling salt, and the bank kind of reduced the number of employees or changed the, it started to impose some policies. Then there were Balkan wars, and that was a big problem with the migration, because most of the Turks in the Balkans, they came back to Anatolia or Istanbul, and it's some, if you look into files, there's some horrible events. Then World War I, the same. One important thing with World War I was that the managers and all the owners of the bank, they were called enemies. So they had to leave Istanbul. And then at the end of the war, of course, the Ottomans lost the war. So the English and French came back to the city, and then they called the Germans and the Austro-Hungarian employees enemy. So the bank tried to manage a balance between whom to send back to their countries, whom to keep, and how to manage those difficult times, how to also manage with the government to keep them. Then there was a Spanish flu, another pandemic, very effective, unfortunately, at the Ottoman Empire. And then Turkish War of Independence. So that was also clearly a big crisis to manage for the bank, and they managed it carefully and successfully from the bank's point of view. You can see that they sent their best managers to Ankara to have good relationship with the new rulers, and for the first 10-15 years, the Ottoman Bank actually kept its name. It's the only institution in Turkish Republic who kept the name Ottoman. All the other institutions, they were by law had to change their name. The Ottoman Bank kept its name, the Ottoman Bank, and plus they had the privilege to print money. So something is quite successful with the management of this bank, for sure. But what? So if we just look into data, we can see that the bank, so Imperial Ottoman Bank, IOB, is agile, because this is the timeline from 1856 to 1922. These are all these horrible events happening. And this is the number of branches, just a simple data. So you can get this data also from Wikipedia, the opening of branches. And this is some economic data. The black one is from a paper about unskilled worker salary in the Ottoman Empire. So 1885 till 1920. You see a peak here around 1910. So things went quite well at that time, because probably this was between wars and people were happy. The first glimpse of democracy is happening in Turkey, in the Ottoman Empire. So the competitors of the Ottoman Bank, they start to increase their number of branches afterwards. But the Ottoman Bank, almost in 1909, started to open their branches immediately. So this sign is 1910, 1910. So the competitors are waiting. So the bank is very agile. They started to open everywhere new branches, because increase in unskilled worker salary also tells us that there is money on the tables and there are the banking needs. So you have to open branches to fulfill those banking needs. Another numerical tool we can use is to explain diversity. It's called the Herfindahl-Hirschman index. It's usually used for to understand the competition situation in a market, but it's also used for diversity. So if this index is between 0.15 and 0.25, you have moderate diversity. And if it's above 0.25, it means less diversity, high concentration. So the goal is to keep this index between 0.15 and 0.25 to have a moderate diversity. To our surprise, if you look at the diversity index of the bank at the headquarters, we have this dashed line is 0.25. The headquarters was always diverse for the blue line. Blue line means 8 religious entities. So we are not considering 3 big religions as, but we are also considering ethnic minorities. Like we have in Gregorians, Greek Orthodox, we have Catholics, Protestants, we have Sunnis, Alevites or Shiites, and we have Jews. So if we only look into 3 religions, so Islam, Christian, and Jews, so this is the orange line, and you don't see much diversity. But it's also not right, because what we want to look into diversity is ethnicity. And ethnicity is, in this geography, ethnicity is closely correlated with the religious groups. So the blue line is much more corrective interpretation of the data. And if we look at the large branches, for example, Izmir, Smyrna, Cairo. They are always diverse. If you look into smaller ones like Haifa, Ankara, they are not so, it's fluctuating all the time. And it's also logical because when you're a smaller branch in a smaller city, you would like to take into local preferences into consideration. So after the Republic, probably Ankara branch became much more Muslim, and the Haifa branch became at one point more Jewish, and then it also closed down. So the data is not very clean, but still sends some correct signals to test the hypothesis, some of the hypotheses. And then we looked into promotions and transfers, for example. So we looked into 1,000 promotion records and looked into how people promoted and transferred. For example, this guy. So this guy, Edmund Taha, he's from Istanbul, Catholic, and he studied in Istanbul and then also started working for the bank. For different years, he started working at the headquarters and then moved to the Black Sea region. And then from the Black Sea region, he went to Ankara because he became an experienced guy. In 1923, he became the vice director of the Ankara branch. And then later on, he moved back to Istanbul and retired. So a typical guy. So when we look into these networks, we see that we have promotion paths, major promotion paths, local promotion paths, critical success path, and then also we see who is hiring who is considered more valuable, and we are looking into this salary and benefit journey. So this gives us lots of information on how people live, how people got successful, and how the bank got managed. So next is we want to discuss this data with our colleagues from social sciences, and because what we can do is only limited with our computer science knowledge, and this is dangerous. So we are probably going to invite some social scientists towards autumn to discuss this data, especially economics professors from on Ottoman Empire, to see what we if what we are doing is right and are we on track. And then if we can figure out to get some more funding, because just a note, but an important note, that cultural heritage is a research area where you don't get any funding. So I have been into cultural heritage projects since 1997, and starting with my PhD. And usually you do cultural heritage projects just for the fun of it, because there's very little money on cultural heritage projects, unfortunately, but this is a fact. So if we can get some funding, we want to look into British, French, German, and US newspaper archives, because These archives, they contain even advertisements of the bank or financial information on the bank, some different stuff. We processed surprisingly successfully these board meeting minutes. And finally, these are also the women of the bank. So very interestingly, the bank records don't have a field called for gender. So they assumed everybody is male. But if you look deeply into the files and also the pictures, you see they also had almost 200 female employees from time to time. But it was all a male dominated bank, of course, giving the times perspective. Okay, here I would like to stop. So this is my group. The upper line is the elderly researchers of the lab, and I'm open to questions. Please.
Hocam, thank you so much. So during crisis periods, especially hiring and promotion mechanisms of slightly newer jobs actually gives us a lot in terms of the social demographic composition of a country. I would be very interested in the hypothetical question that if we were to do a similar kind of network mapping of promotions, relationships, and people in technology companies, for example, what would you think would be the outcome? Because we have similar kinds of trauma, maybe not a world war, but like several wars, pandemic, economic crisis, financial crisis, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk trying to do a cage fight. And so if we were to basically do a similar kind of research for today's technology company environment, what would that look like in Europe?
Well, unfortunately, we don't have any data on that. So our main motivation into looking into those networks is that with our findings, maybe we can motivate some companies to share their data. So it's almost impossible to get that data out of the company. And the only resource might be LinkedIn. So if you can get data, but you cannot scrape LinkedIn, it's not possible. So I would say maybe internal research organizations of those companies can do such a study. It's really pity that we can look into very exciting network effects, but still we don't have access to that kind of data. And from my own expertise, I don't think that we can have access to that kind of data in any near future. So maybe smaller companies, venture-backed companies might allow, because their funders, the venture capitalists, can ask them to do that, to learn some insight about successful and more successful and less successful companies. But I haven't seen any study based on data doing what you have just described. One other issue is that since 2018-19, if you want to publish a data science paper at a prestigious journal, you have to share your data. So you cannot say that I worked with, let's say, with this bank, JP Morgan, and we figured out that this is the network. Good journals don't accept such papers anymore. So that's also one of the, I mean, It's rightfully so, because we have seen many other issues with private data. But that's, at the end of the day, no organization would want to see their private data on public domain.
So in this group, we have people who are interested in history, interested in, you know, automated Arabic scripts or the Latin scripts, text detection. Do you have any questions with regard to Professor Balcısoy's projects on using bank registers to infer, you know, imperial mobility, upward mobility, and basically, you know, those professional networks? Yes, Ben. So try to speak really loud so that maybe can't hear you. Yeah, this camera doesn't turn that way, so you can
Okay,
see how
no
crowded
problem.
the room is. So, ciao.
Hello, Selim Hocam. Thank you
Hello.
for the presentation. I was wondering if there are some publications of specific work and also the process of trying to integrate your work with eScriptorium.
Okay, we are preparing presentation publications, so it's not out yet, because we have finished reading or processing of this data just around April, and so and then came the summer, so it will take some time, but there will be, and we will also put our tools into GitHub for free download once they are ready, especially for this, what you have mentioned, the tight integration with the eScriptorium. We are preparing an interface, user interface, so that you don't have to be a computer scientist or PhD in computer science to use that tool. So right now it's quite difficult to use that tool. So we are building a shell around that tool to have ease of use and also to have validation. So the idea is to have that workflow as smooth as possible. So from raw data to analytics.
And do you think is there a big difference between in terms of difficulty in reading these handwritten French documents and Ottoman scripts, again handwritten documents?
I have no expertise in reading any handwriting, so I'm just a user of those tools. But I'm quite surprised that how bad these French handwriting tools were performing, because I was assuming naively that they were quite well. And similarly, I would assume that the Ottoman scripts would be much more difficult because you don't have so much data. So it's a data problem, apparently.
Yes. We have another question.
Hello, John. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you for the presentation. It's actually a really nice study that I'm very interested in it. I just wonder, as you have already showed that the Ottoman Bank presented really good resilience during the disrupted times in terms of opening new branches, as you have already shown in the graphic. But can we understand the reasons of being resilience during these disrupted times? from the data that you have already analyzed?
Okay. The reason. Well, this is just the start. So the reasons we are not looking into the financials and financial management of the company. So we are just looking at the, in other words, output, because human resources is not the input, it's the output. So you do something, the bank gets successful, you hire more people, or you open more branches. This will take some time to convince the archive institution, SALT, to share with us the financials, because they also have the financial data, but we don't have access to that yet. It's a good question. So what is the input, or what are the why did they succeed? So, but those were the financial decisions made by the directors, but we don't have access to that.
I wanted to ask this question because I worked a little bit on agility in modern times, agility in companies. So that's I wonder actually, is it possible to reflect some insights from the archives to the modern times? So that's what I want. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think this is what we have figured out with agility is another thing which I haven't present here, that the bank was very agile to change the structure of the branches. So they were hiring and transferring people very fast to different branches, and so they can change the, for example, if there is a local conflict in a region and one of the ethnic minorities employed by the bank were threatened because they are not wanted anymore in that region, they were actively supporting their employees and relocating them immediately. So I think one of the reasons why they were so successful is not agility, resilience, and so on. It's about the culture, because you can see also from when you read the documents about this, meeting documents, you can see that they cared a lot about their employees. Incredibly, even now we don't have companies doing that so much. So they supported them. They were sending their employees to trainings abroad, which is, even now, it's a big benefit. I mean, so the employee culture was very strong. This can be one of the reasons. So I would assume that in that way, the employees are not only employees, but they see themselves as partners of the company, because they were very active. That can be one of the reasons.
Thank you very much, Hocam.
Thank you.
Any questions? Yes, Hocam.
Okay, yeah,
Sorry,
well, I'm pretty sure we can move this camera, but I think it requires have to take it here. But yeah, this is very interesting study. Well, I remember seeing this before at Koç as well. So one question I have, so since you have these records, I assume, I think you also mentioned you can also see biographical information, like if like who is like the father and mother information as well, right? So is it true? So I was wondering if is there any way to somehow infer whether appointments are being done on a merit based or not? Because one thing that's I think possible to do is you can always infer, for instance, if if someone's father is a pasha or something, that would be in the title. And titles are giving lots of information during Ottoman period, like Beshe, Pasha, all these things. And that's that because like one thing that would be interesting to see politically connected, and that of course it will require some operationalization, such as I don't know, if your father is Pasha, are you more likely to get promotion? And that would probably decline over time. I don't know if merit-based appointment is like if that's increasing. Do you have any plans to you know work on area?
Yes, actually, it is stated. So when you look into the files, so you have father's name and father's profession, and then also who is watching for that person. So some kind of a guarantee. So you cannot just join the bank if you have graduated from a good school, but somebody you have to say that, okay, I know this person, person can be write a reference letter for me, similar to what we have today. So but those fields in the data are important, especially climbing the social ladder. We haven't started yet with reading that area because it's difficult to discretize. For example, there is one guy and his uncle is a prominent lawyer in Konya, and this is his reference, my uncle, he says. And with 18, he got hired because probably his uncle was a good customer of the bank. But anecdotally, what we have seen that the bank was not doing a lot of business with Turkish bureaucracy because they were afraid that they would not pay their debt. So when I looked into the historic books on this on the bank, most of the time people complained about the case that pashas and all these military personnel, they were using their power to get some debt and not paying back. So they were more doing business with local traders and business people, but not with the bureaucratic elite. So the same probably goes for whom they hire. And but the merit-based approach is also, we can see from training. So they usually send their best people to training to abroad. This is something we can track and then promote them. So it's one of the cases.
Well, another, so since I think you just mentioned that you can also start like working on like other parts of the archive as well. So because one thing super important for political economy is like whether institutions matter, right? So here, for instance, I mean, we have this bank expanding, and I was wondering whether that's because so for instance, if there are like these plans to open branches, but they never materialize for whatever reasons, and if you can somehow track them, that would also give us some like a nice research design where we can compare maybe like local economic growth, where there are like these branches, whether they expand, like whether they help, they promote economic growth, local economic growth in certain parts of the country versus those like places where these banks never had branches and because of the endogeneity problem. So that's if there are like these plans where like these branches never materialize for reasons other than economic considerations. So I don't know if you can somehow find those, that would be very interesting. At least to solve the endogeneity problem and to see whether really these institutions matter for economic growth or not. Of course, I mean that's probably will require to also collect data on economic growth, but that's available at least for the field that you're focusing on. I mean, taxation data is available.
We look into, just for the case of Izmir, we look into local economy, We have a historian at Sabancı University, Emre Erol, and he focuses on history of Izmir. And we did that for some time. And then there are some correlations between people movements in the branch with the other with the economical trends and tendencies.
Yeah, that I think that would be very interesting if somehow it can be shown with the research design. Yeah, that would be a huge contribution, I guess, for political economy ethics. Well, thank you, John.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, no more questions. So John, thank you so much. Please join me.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Goodbye. Have a nice time.
Thank you so much.
Bye bye.
You so much.